Now let's take a look at sharpening the chainsaw. Having a sharp chainsaw saves the saw and makes it a lot more fun to do. There are all kinds of ways to sharpen a saw. The most common is to take it to a dealer. And I think that's a shame, because what the dealer will use is an electric machine that will take way too much steel off of the chain. Chains are quite expensive, and you only need to take off the amount that you need to take off for the nick, when you hit that rock or whatever. So what we do is we look for the worst tooth, and we bring that up to the fore. And then we put on a chainsaw sharpener that actually can be regulated just by your hand to take off the right amount. This is a Granberg saw jig. I bought this in 1960. It's still working perfectly. And the new ones that they sell look exactly the same. They haven't changed a bit. So that clamps on, and you take that right into the woods with you, of course, because that's where the saw gets dull. We bring the sharpener so that it is set right above the rivets of the chain. And then we clamp it in place, and then we screw the two little bars that will hold the chain upright. Then we flip the file onto the tooth. I like to push it down onto the stump that I'm using to hold it in place. And then I simply draw it against the tooth, and I count the number of strokes that it takes to get rid of that nick. So it'll be anywhere from 4 to 8 strokes. So if that does it for that tooth, let's say it took 7 strokes, I'm now going to do 7 strokes for every tooth. Now I like to put a magic marker on the tooth, the first tooth that I did, so that when we get around, all the way around, I'll know that I've done them all. So it's incredibly simple, and you do this right there in the woods, and in maybe 5 minutes, you'll have it all sharpened. Half the teeth are in one direction. When we twirl this around, we go in the other direction and do the other set of teeth. So by taking off only what you need, your chain should last twice as long, at least twice as long, as when you take it to a dealer to have it done. And it is the thing in America to do everything with automation and with power and electricity and so on. And I can't tell you how satisfying it is to sharpen a chainsaw by hand, where you're actually looking at the tooth, you're seeing the filings fall off, and you're noticing exactly the point where it's sharp. Now, in front of every cutting tooth, there is another tooth. And that other tooth is there to prevent the cutting tooth from taking too big a bite. It's sort of like the difference between a chisel and a plane. A plane is basically a chisel in a body that keeps it from taking too big a bite. So as we sharpen the cutting tooth, because it's at an angle, it gets shorter and shorter. So pretty soon it's at the same height as the raker that's in front of it, and now nothing happens. So every once in a while we need to take a little bit of metal off of the raker that's in front of the cutting tooth. And that's done with a flat file. You would want to buy a flat file that has no teeth on the edges. So this has no teeth here and no teeth here, but plenty over here. We always file the tooth that's away from us, and we file away. So I would give that maybe 3 strokes and do that all the way around. So the question is, when do you do that? Well, when you're chainsawing, you'll notice at first with a brand new chain, you're going to have sawdust that's about this long. Nice long chunks of sawdust are falling all over the place. As the saw gets dull, they'll get shorter, and when you really hit something, you don't get long chunks, you just get dust. And you should never get to the point where you just get dust. So you sharpen it and try it again. And if you're getting those long pieces, it's perfect. If you're getting shorter pieces, it means that the raker in front is still too long. So give it 1 more stroke all the way around. Again, we're trying to take the least amount of metal off because we want it to last. And too often people take too much metal off. The wood that you are sawing also has quite an effect. So like oak will take less of a difference between the cutting and the raker. In pine, you can have quite a distance between the raker and the cutting edge. So you can take thicker amounts of wood off. What you'd like is for the saw to easily go through the wood, making long pieces of sawdust. If it's having a hard time, it's because the raker is too short. You took too much off. Now, there are all kinds of devices that make this automatic. Here's the same setup that I have by hand with an electric motor. This has the disadvantage of having a stone that's round. So the stone, of course, wears out. So as you're working your way through it, it gets narrower and narrower, so you're changing the radius of the tooth. The other type is like a circular saw blade. That's a carborundum, and you simply move it back and forth like this, and that just takes way too much off. It's very difficult to control to get the right amount off. I really believe that none of these new devices that have come on the market recently are nearly as good and satisfying as this simple handheld sharpener. So the question is, when you bought the chainsaw, they will give you a file to file it with. And the file might even have some kind of a handle that supposedly keeps the file in the right angle. Those never work. When you move from one tooth to another, you'll get a different angle, and so the teeth will all be working differently. So this jig here will hold the file in exactly the same place so that every tooth is at the same angle. And this makes the chain cut way, way better than one that has been done by hand. There's no way that your hand is going to replicate that angle. This jig, actually, I forgot to mention, does have a depth. So we can turn this screw here to raise the file up and bring it back down. We move the tooth right to the center of the file, so it's exactly in the right place, and we can adjust the angle. So 35 degrees is a fairly good all-around angle, but different woods are subject to different angles that you might try. We can also tilt the file. I don't recommend that, but if you tilt quite a bit, you can make the tooth have a very sharp point so that it will cut to beat the band. And that's what you would do at a county fair where you're competing with somebody else. But in the woods, it doesn't work out because that point very quickly gets dull. So you now have to constantly sharpen the saw. So keeping it flat is usually the best course. I did not talk about chains. There are all kinds of chains out there. The Oregon company chain is a standard chain that's been out there forever, and they have a variety of qualities of chain. The teeth on chains can be quite different. I like the slightly rounded tooth. The more popular tooth is flat on top, called a chipper chain. Because it's flat on top, it does make more of a point. And I actually dislike that because that gets dull more quickly. The round tooth spreads the damage a little bit better, so it stays sharper longer. So it's whether you want performance or whether you want longevity of use. And there are saws now made out of tungsten carbide, extremely hard teeth that don't get dull nearly as fast in wood. But if you hit a rock or something, they will dull just as fast as the other ones. So to some extent, they're of more use. You can buy the chain exactly the right length for your chainsaw. So it's important when you buy your chainsaw that you record what the chain is. And there will be a bunch of numbers somewhere, and make sure that you have that, so that when you go to buy another one, you know which of the 50 little packets there will fit that particular saw. Those numbers get jumbled up very quickly. I buy my chain in rolls. So like 50-foot rolls is common, or 125-foot rolls are common, so that I can simply punch the rivet. A rivet is nothing but a rod that has been flattened on both sides. So if you slightly unflatten one side and take a nail or something, you can punch the rivet out. So the chain is easily broken open, and then when you put it back together, you just take a hammer and tap around that rod and flatten it out again, so it's easy to make up chains. So in the woods, I would do it with just a nail and a punch, and then I use the file that I have for the rakers to slightly weaken one side of the rivet. But they do have a tool that will do all of that. This is simply a chain break, and it pops the chain open, and when you're putting it back together, it actually peens the rivet back. So this is a lovely tool to have. It makes it very easy to put chains together.
Hey there, thank you for watching. Here at Shelter Institute in Woolwich, Maine, we teach a wide variety of house building and timber framing and carving classes. We'd love to see you here, but if you can't make it to Maine to take one of our classes, our online class is available at shelterinstitute.com.